Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Reside Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Miel, CEO of the experience agency D Flash. Each week, I bring on a different person from business who's doing some game changing work. And this week's episode is no different. I'm so excited to have Dr. Phyllis Bivins Hudson, who's an educational consultant. I'm going to talk about the future of education, what it means to be an educator in this really unique time, and her amazing history along the way. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. Take a listen. Hey, Phyllis, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How about you?
Oh, it's now fall where we're stuck inside.
I think it's been fall for a while because at least I feel like it. I've been stuck inside since March.
You were not wrong about this. But even though we are stuck inside, the podcast still stays the same, which means the first question stays the same. Mm-hmm. So, Phyllis, what was your first job?
My first job before getting into education, believe it or not, was being a secretary. I was a secretary and then I became an administrative assistant. But along the way, realizing I was not willing to sit behind a desk for the rest of my life as a secretary or an administrative assistant, I decided I wanted to go on to college. And so I did, and I became an educator. And that is, I did middle school for about 27 years. So my first real job that I would consider my real job would be my job as an educator.
Awesome. So, I think it's an interesting time, obviously, for educators right at this moment because we're in a pandemic, which no one could have predicted. And we now have these sort of very weird and odd hybrid learning, even though retired but not tired. What have you been seeing for educators right now and trying to navigate this very unusual time?
Well, I've been seeing a lot of struggling, but I also see that there's light at the end of the tunnel. So, for instance, we have a lot of new teachers coming into the field, and that's exciting because along with that newness comes a lot of education for them around technology. And as you know, with the hybrid situations or the virtual situations or combination of the two, a big part of that is technology. And so I have high hopes for a lot of our new teachers because that part of the process is being navigated well, I believe. And so that's probably the biggest part of this whole virtual world that we're in is having someone in front of the computer who actually knows what to do with the computer. And that's not to say that they don't have other challenges because we all do. But that part of it, I think, is good.
Well, yeah, I know. It's just, it's all kind of crazy because obviously it's not the same as being in the classroom and being able to, read a kid differently than you can read a kid on a Zoom.
Yeah.
And it's just obviously unbelievably challenging. Like when you were first starting, what was the thing that you were like, okay, this is why I want to have this job?
Well, I wanted to have the job as a teacher because I remembered all of my teachers when I was in school. Some of my colleagues chuckle when I say, I can actually remember all of my teachers, everybody's name from kindergarten through middle school. And I can remember most of the teachers in high school. But the reason for that, it was because these people were a part of my village. They were people who actually helped to raise me, so to speak. And that was in part because my situation was somewhat unique. And I say somewhat unique because I'm sure many people have experienced what I experienced. But for my own situation, I was coming out of a situation where I was homeless a lot. And so that being the case, I had to depend on my educators to take care of me. And that's what they did. They took care of not just the academic part, but they took care of the physical and they took care of other things as well. I mean, there were times when my teachers had to feed me. There were times when my teachers had to clothe me. And there were times when my teachers had to house me. So it made me want to become an educator so that I would be able to touch the lives of some of the students that I had in the same way that my teachers had touched my life. it made me also understand that as a teacher, I wanted to be this because I understood that teaching was not just standing in the classroom and spewing out knowledge, but it was also feeding children in a different way. You know, we as teachers, we become teachers, but we also become confidants, we become spiritual leaders, we become parents, we become friends, we become all these things, counselors. We're all these things to children. And I think it takes a special person to be able to encompass all of those things and let them come out among those children that are being serviced. And so that's why I wanted to be in education. I wanted to give back in the same way that had been given to me.
That's amazing and so true. I mean, like I feel like teachers are this special crew of just amazingness. And when you get to have amazing teachers like yourself, the impact that you make on your students lasts a lifetime.
Yes, it
Uh,
does.
I can't. I remember my kindergarten teacher. I remember my freshman high school history social studies teacher, Miss Moran, and to this day, who's a friend of mine now.
Mhm.
And she changed my whole life in terms of how I viewed who I thought I could be versus who I ended up becoming.
Mhm.
And I think that's just the magic of it all. You
Yes,
know,
those are
along
those are the teachers with what we call the it factor.
and how does a teacher have this it factor? Because I think oftentimes, especially, there are a lot of communities where like you may not have a Black teacher your entire existence. Like I had very few. I grew up on Long Island, but I went to private school, so I was at private Catholic school. So I didn't have that many Black teachers during my experience. And, it would be great to talk about what it means, how important it is to have diverse teachers in the rooms for kids growing up.
Yeah, so if teachers were to take the high road in this, and when I say the high road, I mean looking at their classrooms with these students sitting in there and saying to themselves, I need to be culturally aware of those people who are sitting in front of me. That's going to be a big step in moving in the right direction and really having that it factor, because the fact that you're culturally competent, it means that you're not stepping into this space and saying it's about me, it's about my culture, it's just about what I have grown to know and to love and to respect and to and so forth. But it's not about that, it's about every child in my classroom. So to give you, for instance, when I always taught middle school, but when I approached certain subjects in my classroom, like for instance, I taught language arts, and so literacy was big. I wanted to make sure that those stories were not just stories that spoke to one child in the classroom or one group of children in my classroom. I wanted to make sure that they spoke, that I selected stories that spoke to everybody. So to ensure that that happened when sometimes those stories were not available to me, every year I would have this cultural event that encompassed every culture in my classroom. And my classroom was not consistent of just 30 students, but I had 5 classes. And so that meant I had to represent all of the students in all of those classes. And so we made it a project where students would come in and get an opportunity to not just talk about their cultural background or their cultural experiences, but they were able to display these things. And so we created something in my classroom that ended up becoming a school-wide event where parents came out and took part, and they learned about the culture of all of the children, so that this was not a classroom or a project or that just spoke to one or two children in the classroom. So it wasn't just about the Black children or the white children, but it was about all of the children. I had Asian students, Latino students, African American students, African students, Jewish students, so I had all kinds of students. And I kept seeing that the literature was very heavily based in one area. And so in my good consciousness, I could not see myself addressing just that one group of students, because then I recognized that I had all these other students sitting in the background saying, well, where am I? Because that's the question I used to ask as a student. Where am I? I don't see myself in there. I see myself here in this space, in this time. So I had to be somewhere in there, my ancestors, in order for me to be here. And so when teachers are culturally competent, then they are on the road to making sure that they're doing what they need to do to have the it factor. That's just one part of it. They have to get out of self and respect the fact that other people are among them and that those people matter.
I'll just go ahead and preach.
Sorry, I'm very passionate about this, and so I guess
no, that's why I wanted you. That's why I wanted you to talk about it, because I think this is the thing that, like, it's not just getting a bunch of Black teachers in the schools. It's like they're still going to need, if you're a white teacher, if you're an Asian teacher, if you're a South Asian teacher,
exactly,
you've got to be able to teach them this.
And if you don't know about the culture, then it's your responsibility to learn about the culture. And when you do that, you're richer for it. And so are your students, because now you can share in their culture, but you also sharing your own culture. And you're saying to them, I respect who you are. I respect your people. I respect your ancestors. I respect where you came from, because I've taken the time to figure out some things about your culture. And I think that's what it needs to be.
It's so very true. It's like, if you don't know, learn.
Exactly. That's what we tell the students. And I train new teachers for Rutgers University. I'm one of the alternate route instructors, actually one of the co-founders of the alternate route teacher training program for Rutgers. And so I've been doing this with them since 2003, which was the inception of the program. And I am constantly saying to those teachers that I service, if, when you're in your classroom, if your children are lacking something, you bring it to them. And so in that same sense, I say, if you're lacking knowledge of their culture, you bring it to yourself so that you can learn about them. There is no excuse for not knowing that.
Yeah, it's so much about, like, there is no excuse. It's funny, like, I learned about the Tulsa Massacre when I was in school, but I think, I went to a school that was, I loved history, became, my favorite class, and now I have a degree in it. What about the schools where, like, they're sort of leaving out really important parts of, like, Black history, like the Tulsa Massacre? What struck, systemic racism is. Like, how do we get to a point where we're actually here studying our history so that we understand our past, so that we can help build our future?
Well, we have to, that's something that has to start at the state level. I believe the state has to insist that these things are put in place. However, when the state doesn't do it, it is incumbent upon those at the next level. And so for the school districts, those at the next level would be the superintendent. And if the superintendent doesn't do it, then it falls on the principal. And if the principal doesn't do it, then the teachers need to do it. So when I said there's no excuse, I mean there's no excuse. And so when these things are missing, if we go to the top and the top doesn't do what the top is supposed to do, then that trickle down effect will remain in place unless somebody just takes the reins and say, look, you're not doing it, but I'm going to do it. And you would be amazed at how many lives you can affect just by that one teacher taking those reins and doing what needs to be done. So we have to start at the top and lobby at the top with those people who are in a position to make change, and not just let it go, not just give lip service, but say these are the things that demonstrate proof that these are the things that are needed, and then ensure that these things are happening by staying the course and speaking to these people constantly and writing letters to these people constantly and demonstrating to them constantly that these are the things that need to happen. And, many times people will say, well, but, I don't know exactly what it is that you need. Then as that person who's asking, that person needs to make sure that he or she has everything together that's needed so that when the approach is made, those in charge will not be able to say, well, I would have done that, but I didn't really know what to do. Because now you're saying, well, here's an example, or here's evidence, or here's some place you need to go, or here's some people you need to talk to. So you provide what they need, because otherwise we know what happens. People will very easily say, well, it's not a part of my culture. And I did the research, but I couldn't tell what needed to be included. And I wasn't sure how to go about it. So you have to take all those excuses away and make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, no more excuses. Just do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, obviously in your amazing career, was there ever a time where you were like, wait, I don't know if I'm going to be able to, this is just too insane, or a too difficult challenge? And how did you sort of navigate your way through and come through the other side?
So, there actually were moments when I saw things happening that were just disheartening, and I would try to figure things out on my own. So one thing in particular, when I left urban education the first time and I went into suburban education, I learned very quickly that the only difference in the children was economics. And so that being said, I pretty much did the same thing with suburban children that I did with urban children. But here's one of the problems that came up. I realized that in that setting, those children who were being transferred to that school from urban areas were having a tough time. And part of the reason that they were having a tough time was because there was pre-assumptions made about them already. When they came from an urban area, it was automatically assumed that they were problem children, that they were learning disabilities, that they could not learn, that they were slower than everyone else, that they were behavioral problems, and all these different things. And so I was in a position where I was considered a really good teacher. And so most of my students were Caucasians. And so I had white parents who would, in the summertime, would request that their children be in my classroom. And so the way that the situation was set up is we had the top level of students, one class, the top level of students, that was the second class, the middle level of students, that was the third class. And then you had what we call the lower level performing students. And that was kind of the bottom. And of course, most of the kids in that class were Black. In fact, all the kids in that class pretty much were Black or Latino. And then in the middle class, it was pretty much the same thing. You may have had one or two white children in those classes, but in the top class and the top class, 95, sometimes 99% of those kids were white and very few Black children there. So I had this one student in particular who came into the school, and I was very disturbed by the fact that she was put in the lowest level, because it took me all of 10 minutes to realize that she had been misplaced. And so immediately I started trying to figure out what to do with her, because the way that the system was set up, it was very difficult to move a child from one level to the next. And the only way that they could be moved is through testing, and which is what happened when they would first come to the school. You took a test, and the test determined what level you would go in. But what the test doesn't talk about is that everybody's not a good test taker. And sometimes those tests are not revealing the true abilities of the students. And so I kept trying to figure out what I needed to do, because it had happened before, but now here I was with this young lady, and I was just not about to allow her to stay in that position, because I knew that she would lose ground, but also that she was so much smarter than she was being given credit for, and that she could function in those top classes. It could be the top or the top class. So I was at the point I was actually writing my dissertation, and my dissertation, I was thinking about it, but my dissertation became a dissertation that was centered around this young lady. So it was talking about, grouping students and so forth. And my principal, I happened to have a principal who believed in me. And when I had the conversation with him about my concerns, he allowed me to do what I thought was right. And so I figured out how to get this child put into the top class, with the understanding that after having a conversation with her, that she had to really perform, because these were kids who were not just just typical eighth graders. These were kids who had taken some of them had taken the SATs and received 1,600 on it already. Some of them were being bused to the high school to take math, because the math program we had was for eighth graders, and they were far beyond that. Some of these kids were just really bright kids. So he allowed me to do that. I did that. And once I did that, I had some boys who fell in that same category, but they have behavior issues. So I worked very diligently with them on their behavior and got them into those classes as well. And those kids, all three of them, went from D's and F's to A's and B students. And that was a challenge for me, because I had parents challenging the fact that these kids were put in there with their kids. I had, staff members saying, no, they can't do it, blah, 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 blah. And yet these kids performed, and in some cases outperformed those students that they were told were much smarter than they were. So these are sometimes the kinds of challenges that you're faced with, because because the status quo is what it is, and it's not easy to change that. And I was able to change it, at least for those three children, and on that level.
That's so amazing and so true. It's like, if there are teachers who can see it and are able to sort of advocate for the kids, so much can be changed. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about, look, I'm dyslexic. Didn't know I was dyslexic until I was like a sophomore in college. So I'd always been a straight A student. I had a couple of weird quirks where I was a horrible test taker, straight A student, could memorize everything. Ask me to read something off a piece of paper, and I would just become a stuttering mess. Mm-hmm. And I literally couldn't read. And I read this book called The Gift of Dyslexia, and I realized that I was dyslexic. I was like, oh, that's what it is. Like, what my quirks were as a kid going to school were just my sort of overcompensation for my dyslexia. But there's so many other kids. But when I was a kid, my mom, they wanted to put me in a different, one of the other classes, because I was like, I couldn't read out loud. I could read really well, but I would just stutter. It was like I couldn't read out loud. And my mom went to the school that she was paying a good amount of money for, and told them and reminded them that she was paying them a lot of money, and that to not put me in this other class, and that actually I was bored. And if you gave me more homework to take home with me, I would be just fine. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I had double the homework from like first grade to fifth grade, and I hated it, but I ended up being the best student. Mm-hmm. But that level of, having someone to advocate for you when you're in school, whether it be a parent or be a teacher, oftentimes it just isn't available to especially kids of color. And that's why there is this horrible education gap.
Yeah, and what they do, it's called tracking. And so many of the schools take the claim that they subscribe to the claim that tracking is not done anymore. But it is still done, and many times it's done very covertly. And so, when it's done that way, it's happening. But if you're not savvy about what goes on in education, then you don't necessarily know that it is happening. You'll be fed something about how, oh no, we have them grouped by ability levels, but all of the kids in here, everybody's still getting the same thing. They're all getting the same education, and that's not always the case. Tracking, I think, it can be very detrimental to our kids, because what happens is they get tracked and they stay in those tracks, and those tracks follow them throughout their academic career. So if you're in the low level class, when you get ready to move to the next class, you're going to still be in a low level class, and then the next class. And then when you go on to the high school, it's still going to be the same thing. You're going to be tracked and you're going to be in that low level class again. So you never get to take AP courses or anything like that unless you have what you just pointed out, an advocate. If you have an advocate, then it'll happen for you. But if you don't have an advocate, you many times you are left in those situations, and it really is bad for our kids. Because see, what will happen is you'll have educators who will say, those in charge who will say, oh well, all she has to do is take a test, and if she tests out, then she'll no longer be in this particular track. Yeah, but what happens if she is very smart, but she does not do well on tests? There are many people who are not good test takers. Like you said, you were very smart, but having you read something out loud was just awful for you. The same thing happens with some children. They may not be able to take a test, but they can run circles around other children with academia. So we have to have another measure for doing that kind of thing. And we have to call people on their stuff when they start saying things like, we're not tracking, yet we don't have any kids of color in our AP programs. So then what are you saying? Every kid in this school who's of color is just not bright enough to meet the standards of your AP program? I doubt that. There's some very brilliant children out there. And I think if given an opportunity, many of them would prove the system wrong.
That's the thing. It's like, it's like, but for having these advocates, there's so many kids, who don't get to see the rest of the world because of that. And it's so important for us to be able to say, like, don't leave these kids behind. Like they're brilliant kids. And there's always this, like we talked about, like I grew up in Hempstead, I went to private school. And, part of the reason I went to private school was because my parents were like, yeah, we heard about this public schools system was not the greatest. And, I have 3 degrees. I own my own company. Like I went to NYU on a full ride. I had 4 other Ivy League schools I could have gone to because I went to a private Catholic school on Long Island that like prepped me for that and put me on that path. But
and imagine if other children had those opportunities, had those advocates for them. Many children could be in that same situation that you and I are talking about, but because they don't necessarily have advocates, it becomes an issue for them. And part of the whole advocacy piece is it's not in place because we have a lot of parents who really don't know the system. They don't know how to advocate for their children, and that was one of the situations I was in too. When I returned to urban education, I was put in a position where I was able to advocate for not just children, but for parents as well. And that's exactly what I did. Was that my job? Absolutely not. Nobody told me I needed to do that. Nobody told me to do that, but I did do it, and I did it covertly. So I would have to have conversations, the side conversation with a parent. I'd have to say to the parent, this is what you need to say when you go into this meeting. These are the questions you need to ask. And you need to walk out with an answer to these questions, and don't let people off the hook. Make them answer your questions. And I would have to say to them, you can't say that we had this conversation. If you do, I'm going to deny it. And so many parents, went in with knowledge that they should have had, but did not know that they should have. And as a result of that, they were able to get their children what their children needed.
It's so true. I mean, we could talk about this forever. As I said, as someone who saw it as a kid, and like, wait, you and we live in the same town. We just go to 2 very different schools, and as a result, our lives are going to be completely different. Like this is, it's one of the reasons why I do what I do, because like for me, it's like, but for 7 minutes of distance of like where I live versus where a kid who looks exactly like me, same complexion, same height, we will live different lives.
Exactly.
And I think it's so important to lift as you climb. It doesn't mean that you have to always give $11,000 to something. What it really means is that when you can speak up or when you can put in a good word, you should. You don't leave people behind. If you just do the right thing. And so
Absolutely.
thank
Absolutely.
you for the work that you've done over these years. It's interesting, like, we're in this really crazy time. We're all stuck at home. It's all brand new. Like, how are you navigating your self-care?
Well, it's interesting you would ask that. I became a part of what we are calling COVID-15. And that is, of course, having put on 15 pounds through COVID. And so I was definitely one of those people. And I woke up one morning and I wear protective hair because I don't feel like doing my own hair. And after a while, you're inside since March. And so I took my hair down and I decided to just pull my hair up and put it on a bun. And I looked in the mirror and I was like, oh my God, look at my face. It was so pudgy. And I thought, I've got to do something about this. And so I started walking in my house, and people think this is a joke, but I'm not kidding about this. I started walking in my house I started out with 4,000 steps a day, and I'm now up to 8,000 steps a day inside my house, and I have lost 20 pounds. So, my self-care has been that, in addition to doing a lot of writing. I have a book that's coming out probably in the next month or so called Flying on Broken Wings. And it actually talks about some of what we're talking about today, because it talks about how education saved me. And so that has been a part of my self-care, and really reflecting on what I have to offer to the new teachers who sit before me every year in September. And so I've been working a lot on that as well. And these things have helped me to to kind of rejuvenate myself, so that when I get back into the swing of things, I am healthy mentally. I'm healthy physically too, but I'm healthy mentally. And my classes just my Rutgers classes actually just started last Wednesday, and I felt really good about that. But I also do a program, a mentoring program for another school district, and I will be meeting with those new teachers in another week or so, and I'm feeling energized about that as well. And so I think the fact that my energy is what it is, it's going to spill over in what I do, and hopefully it's going to help these new teachers navigate through this situation, because we're all in a very new territory, and we've got to help each other as much as possible.
So true. Tell me about the book. What are we going to learn?
Oh, well, well, thank you for asking. You're going to learn about who I really am, and all the challenges that I had to withstand growing up in the South, and finally getting the kind of education that I got. But in getting that education, it came with a price. So the story is a story about started with me before even started in kindergarten, actually. And it takes you through all of my years as a child, all the homelessness, all of the times trying to figure out not just where I was going to get my next meal, but where was I going to get the next school. In particular, I in second grade, for instance, I changed schools 4 times in one school year. So the book chronicles my life from the time I was a little baby, before I even started walking, stories that my mom told me, all the way through receiving my doctorate degree. And I think that people will learn along the way some things about education that could help, and hopefully will help anyone who reads it, especially teachers, because it talks about this whole piece that I was talking to you about being a teacher, and how a teacher can save your life. And not just one teacher, but all of your teachers have to be on board with that without even knowing that you are in need of these things. So the book talks about all of those things, and the real challenges that I experienced along the way trying to get that education. It wasn't given to me on a platter. I had to really, really, really work for it. And the system was it was what it is. The system is against many people, and it was against me. In the sense that I should never have been in a situation where I had to be homeless at least 6 or 8 times in my life. That should never have been a situation like that. And so I think when people read the story, they'll come to realize that if certain things are in place, it will make life a lot easier for children who are trying to go to school, children who are trying to get an education, and children who are just trying to get a meal or some place to live or clothes to wear on their backs. So it ends up on a happy note. So I'm hoping that people will read it and will be able to get something out of it, and that it will be able to save somebody else.
Awesome. Can't wait till it comes out. Be sure to share it with us so that
I certainly will.
we'll get people to sign to order it when it comes out
Yeah, I
and
would.
published. But awesome. So, question for you, and last question for you. Do you have a give and or an ask of our audience?
Well, I would like your audience to really look at this audience is it an audience of educators?
It's a little bit of everybody. So you've got marketing people, branding people, entrepreneurs. It's a wide plethora.
Okay, so I would just ask that anybody who is an adult and in business, any kind of business, that you find a way to support our children, especially children of color. They really need it. I mean, sometimes we see them and they all dressed up, and I don't necessarily mean physically, but they seem all dressed up, and they don't always have it together. So any people out there who can mentor children, can provide mentoring services, can share their expertise with a group of youngsters. That would be my ask to help them. You already know that I'm a part of a sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and that is what we do. We're a public service organization, and we help our community. And so, if we could get partners to even come in and help us continue the work that we are doing, that would be great, because it would just touch so many lives. One of the things that we do is, and I'm hoping I'm okay to say this, but we offer a scholarship program every year. And last year meaning this year, of course, in April, we were shut down because of the pandemic, and so we were not able to raise the money that we usually raise for our scholarship recipients. And we usually give away like $70,000-$80,000 a year from that one luncheon that we have. We have nothing because we were shut down. We could not have the event. And so now here we are. We're trying to do this event as a virtual event, and we're not sure if it's going to go off or not. So any support we can get from your audience, we would love and welcome that support. In fact, we're looking for sponsors to help us to get through this for next year. We would hate very much to have our youngsters come to us next year and interview looking for scholarship money, and we have to say, sorry, don't have any. And we've been doing this for 58 years. I'm sorry, 59 years. 59 years. And so 59 years, we've been able to offer every single year a group of deserving youngsters scholarship money. And this year we will not be able to do that unless some miracle happens. And that's what we're looking for right now, is a miracle. So if your audience could help us with that, we would be happy to accept that help.
Awesome. I'm going to put this when we tweet this out and let people know where they can donate. Because look, education is the key for it all.
It is absolutely. That's what saved me. That's exactly what saved me.
It saves everyone. And it's not the only thing, but it's one of the most important things. And so we'll definitely share that in the show notes so folks can know to donate. And I might have some ideas for you too. I'll talk to you about that.
I would also like to ask that people support me in purchasing my book. I would absolutely love for them to do that.
That's what I'm saying.
As I said, it's called Flying on Broken Wings.
We will put the link in so folks can order the book. Awesome. Fantastic. Well, Phyllis, we could keep talking about education and making the world a better place for quite a long time. Thank you so much for joining the show.
You're welcome. I appreciate this. I feel so honored that you even asked me to be a part of it, Laura. I'm always willing to share what I have, whatever that might be, especially with an audience of people so varied in their backgrounds.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, that's why I wanted you on the show. I figured I had a feeling you'd have a lot to say about this subject, and I was right. um,
Absolutely. And call on me
uh,
anytime.
absolutely. And that is our show.